left my glass. Okay.
Good evening, ma'am. We are just getting on live, ma'am.
Okay, you have made it live on YouTube. Yeah, thanks,
Yeah, we
Piyush.
are. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Thanks,
How are
Piyush.
you?
How are you? How are you doing?
I'm in the session.
Hello.
Hello.
Okay, Architect Piyush is actually, Architect Piyush is a faculty from Department of Architecture, Dalbagh Education Institute, a deemed university, and they are hosting all our simple talks. So today's talk also is being hosted by Piyush for Dalbagh University from their Department of Architecture.
Okay.
So Piyush is
Good
taking
evening,
care of
everyone.
that. Thanks, Piyush.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thank you so much. You have classes right now? You will be through the session?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
We are doing classes,
Okay, fine.
but maybe some students will be joining today, ma'am.
Oh, good, good, good. It's a very important topic, and I think it
Yes.
should be. Yeah. Yeah.
Can I have a
Okay.
second?
Thank you.
Sorry, can I have a
Yeah.
second to make a quick cup of coffee?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
Sure.
just a minute. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. We have 3 minutes more. We'll start after that.
Should we keep our cameras on through the introduction or keep them off while? What should we do? Should we keep our cameras off till the introduction and all that is going on, or should we keep them on?
What do you have to keep them on?
The cameras, we'll keep them on, right?
Oh,
Throughout
yeah.
the introduction.
The speakers actually introduction meaning.
Like while you're introducing us, before that we'll keep it on only right now, right? Cool.
Yeah, your videos have to be on. The speakers' videos have to be on. Yeah, and then we will be requesting the participants to actually, mute themselves, and if they can put the video also off, the better. As most of the people do that. So, yeah. Okay.
So the participants are the students of the university, right?
We are good to start, I suppose, 4.
We are starting.
Ladies and gentlemen, a very good evening and warm welcome to all of you to our Simple Talks 22 from CGBMT School of Simple Living. Every day, there are people who, when they leave their homes, they feel unsafe in the outside world. They experience inescapable threats to their lives and livelihoods from the system that has been built up around them. They are forced to move through spaces that feel at best uninviting and at worst mortally dangerous. These people are not abstractions, they are our friends, our neighbors, members of our community, our loved ones. We have witnessed in recent years a decline in the use of public spaces as community hubs. What used to be the beating civic heart of the urban space, a place for people to gather and grow together, has become increasingly privatized and sterile. While there are many factors that contribute to this transition, key among them is a lack of safety for so many of us. Our world is becoming increasingly dangerous for so many that we cannot afford to ignore it anymore. These are imperative and our duty to do what we can to change this. The danger is stitched into the fabric of our environment, and rooting it out will require restructuring of our public realm. How can we begin to shift our public spaces and places towards this ideal? Today, this is the topic of our conversation today, safe spaces and places. And we have three eminent speakers with us today on this topic who have been working towards this issue for a very long time from various perspectives. Please welcome Dr. Mala Bhandari, founder, Social and Development Research and Action Group, Delhi. Ar.Shilpa Ranade, Principal D Group Architects, Mumbai. And Ms. Aakanksha Manjunathaswamy is not a compliment from Melbourne, Australia. Dr. Mala, with her rich and long experience, will be conducting, guiding, and leading the discussion on this very valuable topic. Just for a few, housekeeping rules. So I would request all the participants to keep their keep their, uh, you know, mics off and video off in case it is possible. And they can put their questions in the chat box, which we will be taking in the session for the question answer session for the participants. With this, I would like to, it's a pleasure to introduce Dr. Mala Bhandari. She is a PhD in sociology from University of Delhi. She has 3 years of postdoctoral research experience in gender and development from University of Pune, Maharashtra. She is the founder of Social and Development Research and Action Group, which as I said, which is a non-government organization that works in the interconnected domain of child rights and basic education, adolescent youth and life skills education, child protection, violence against women, and safe city in the peri-urban and rural communities. She has researched and worked extensively in multiple facets of gender and development. And she has over 20 years of experience in research, on ground planning, and implementation of community interventions and capacity building of main functionaries. She has significantly contributed to planning and developing course content for gender and development studies at postgraduate level. She has created effective and well-researched advocacy material for important stakeholders on how to address survivors of sexual violence and abuse. Having traveled the length and breadth of the country, she has worked in various social research institutes and non-governmental organizations and has presented research papers at various academic and professional forums. She is a guest faculty at various colleges of repute. Dr. Bhandari is a member of several district level committees that safeguard the interests of children and women in case of violence and abuse, livelihood deprivation, illiteracy, and ignorance. She is an external member of ICC in various corporations, academic institutions, government departments, and schools, where she strengthens the legal compliances and creates gender-sensitive ecosystem through training of youth, staff, and ICC members. She has been engaged in direct intervention in individual cases of sexual harassment of women at workplace following the guidelines of SH Act 2013. I welcome Dr. Bandari, Dr. Mala Bandari, and I request you to take the session forward.
Thank you, Neelam. A very good evening to all. It's a beautiful, bright evening with the sun shining so brightly on our heads. And it's hot, but that's the disadvantage of staying in a city, maybe. I live in Noida, and Noida, you all know, is an upcoming industrial city. So temperature, weather, I better not comment on. So coming to the topic, I'm very happy to be with you all today. Today's subject is very good, very interesting, and very, very contemporary in nature, because when we all know that about 70% of the world's population is going to be the residents of urban cities in the next few decades. Imagine if everybody is shifting to the urban places, urban cities, what would happen? The need for designing, the planning, making the cities, urban spaces congenial for human and social life would become more important. Having said that, let me introduce today's topic, which is on space, safe spaces, public places, right? It's so important that even the Sustainable Development Goal 11 talks about safe cities, inclusive public places for people. Now, when we talk of inclusive spaces or inclusive places or inclusive cities, what do we understand by that? Inclusivity means when I visit to a particular place, I feel comfortable there. I'm happy there. I'm contented there. I feel as if the place belongs to me. I have that sense of belongingness to that place. I don't feel as if I am lonely or I'm alone or I'm not welcomed in that place. That's what is the understanding of public place in our minds. We have private spaces, we have public places. Private spaces, of course, are so private that it's very difficult to comment on them. But public places is one which is the responsibility of the state, the urban planners, the architects, and whosoever, all the stakeholders who are directly or indirectly involved with the process of creating the cities which are for human beings. And as we know, we human beings are social beings. So we are comfortable only in those places where we are socially interacting or socially bound with each other. Yeah. So if we look at the concept of, I think there was somebody said something. No.
Please
Okay.
go ahead.
Okay. So I'll continue with that. So when we are talking about the safe public places, then how should these public places be? They should be inclusive. They should be inclusive of all kind of people. They should, regardless of their age, regardless of their ability, they may be differently abled, or they may be, they may be from different socio-economic strata, or from different genders, with different sensibilities, all kinds of people across all segments of population. That is what is the concept of public place in our minds. Yeah, and let's build upon it. When we talk about public place, as the times are changing, as there is a change in human behavior, human needs, requirements, this concept of public place is also changing. Why? Because day by day, as year by year, human needs are becoming complex in nature. Our requirements are becoming more and more. We need more diversified kind of spaces for ourselves where we can conduct all kind of functions, all kind of activities. Yeah. And yesterday I was in a market area where I saw that there was the total available space on that in that market area was so badly distributed that there was more space for the cars to move on, but a little space for the pedestrians to make their way. So what was happening is people were bumping into each other. And obviously, it was making women, children, old people prone to abuse because anybody may misuse that moment and bump into you and, cause any kind of harkat, as you say. So that means the market area is not the place where one would be safe and have the feeling of belongingness. And by the way, it's not that the place is not safe, that feeling of safety. Maybe I as a woman may not feel safe to go to that market area again. Similarly, there are such public places where the people from certain strata are excluded. Or maybe the women are scared, are afraid to go in. Yeah. So what kind of inclusivity are we talking about in public places? Public places, if they have to be inclusive, then there are three things which are required. One is the first and the foremost is the safety. Safety of the people. Safety of the people who are visiting those places. Second will be the democracy. The usage of that space is open to all. Yeah. And the third, which is very important, is that there is no discrimination among the people. It's equally, all the functions have equal distribution of space so that one function cannot be sacrificed for carrying out the other function. Yeah. In this aspect, I would like to talk about the sustainability model. What is the sustainability model? In public places, when we talk about a balance between the society, the environment, and the economy, that makes a perfect relationship between the three, and there is equitable distribution, people are given their dues, people's rights are not violated in any sense. That is where we say that this is the sustainability model which will keep happy and which will not make people confront each other in the public places. They say there is violence occurring in public places. Why? Because people are not getting their entitlements, their entitlement to the available space, their entitlement to the usage of available space. We have to work on that. Then another point which is very important is people's participation. Inclusivity is participation, that everybody can participate. And it's not only physical participation, that people, diverse people from different categories can be physically there. There has to be social amalgamation also. Social amalgamation means that we are comfortable with each other. What happened recently, what did we see during COVID times? When the lockdown was announced, we saw that hordes of migrants were on the road. Why? Because we forget one thing, migrants are a very important segment of our population. Without them, our industries, our cities, our urban places will not work. They will stop functioning. But what happens is they are cocooned in the most underdeveloped area of the city, which is devoid of infrastructural services and facilities. So what happened was, when lockdown was announced, we were happy in our apartments, in our houses, but these people, They had nothing. So they came on road. They thought that, I mean, obviously they didn't have the sense of belongingness to this place because this city was not doing anything to them, not giving them anything. So they had to get back to their village. They come to the urban city. Why? For livelihood, for income, for money. So when work stopped, everything stopped. Recently, this concept of smart city has come, which says automation, availability of services, sanitation, health services, automation, technology. Yeah, these are all the components of smart cities. But are we talking of just smart cities, or we are talking of safe smart cities? Is safety aspect of people included in the safe city concept of none? In India, this concept has been introduced, but very little is known about how the safe city concept is going. We are very interested to know how city planning and how smart city thing is actually including all the aspects of human life, especially the social life of humans, the health of people, the physical health, the social health, the emotional health. Yeah. And let's not underestimate the importance of public places. In COVID times, we have seen how important public places are in our life. People are going sick, people's emotional and social health is being impacted. Why? Because they couldn't go out and mingle with people, which is the basic human need. Interaction with others. Yeah. And of late, there is another concept which we are talking about, or another term which is coming along with the smart cities, that is the resilience, the resilient cities. Now, what do we understand by resilient cities? When obviously there are no options, cities will be resilient, people will be resilient. More than that, the importance is that of the dignity of people. If people are given their respect and dignity within the city, through the public places, with no discrimination, with no uneven distribution, no inequality, then all the people, irrespective of their race, color, gender, socioeconomic strata, all those divides, they will be able to enjoy those public places. I feel I was discussing this subject with somebody the other day, and I was just, talking and asking this question: when cities are planned or when public places are planned, is the approach of the planners human centric, or it is more focused on the infrastructure, the division of space, the distribution, or only the economy of it? Because space is limited. Places are limited, they occupy limited space. So I didn't get a very good answer. Maybe during the discussion, when we talk more in terms of the safety and other aspects of public places, we will talk about it. But definitely, I will raise one point here. When we talk of public places, a very important category of people comes in mind. Even there is something like community policing. There's another thing which is coming up, or which has been there, is the people who are occupying the roadside spaces, people who are the hawkers, who are selling their wares, on the roadside. They are the ears and eyes for the people, because they may be accused of, perpetuating violence, or, getting into pickpocketing or other things, but they are very important resource to ensure the safety of a particular geography. So with these little points, I thought that I would throw open this discussion, because we have two very able speakers today in the discussion. One is an architect, the other is a gender activist. Let me introduce our speakers of the day. We have Aakanksha Manjunath with us. Aakanksha was born and raised in India. Her personal experience with domestic violence, mental illness, racism, and other inequalities further strengthened her resolve to create a just and equitable world. Her background involves extensive grassroots campaigning work around the world on issues such as affordable housing, human rights, poverty, urban governance, foreign aid, and youth representation in politics. And now, street harassment as well as advocacy for youth people and the youth sector in Victoria, Australia. She brings this range of perspectives to her work on street harassment, as it's not a compliments executive director and co-founder, and as a marketing communications officer at the Youth Affairs Council, Victoria. Aakanksha graduated from Leiden University with a Bachelor of Arts, Global Studies, and she did her master's at New York University and University of Melbourne. What started as a brainstorming session for a fellowship task in November 2019 soon turned into something more personal when INAC's co-founders Aakanksha and Annalise realized how common street harassment was for many in their circles. Regardless of their gender, sexuality, or racial identity, anyone that could in some way be coded as other had a story to share about a time a stranger had made them feel uncomfortable or unsafe in a public space, and they were determined to share them. Since then, INAC has grown into a full-fledged organization powered by a team of passionate volunteers, united in their belief that no one should have to feel unsafe or less than simply for existing in public. As a grassroots organization fighting for the rights of all individuals to enjoy public spaces free of the fear of harassment, they run projects, workshops, and campaigns that break through the normalization of street harassment and encourage communities to challenge the age-old norms that make this type of harm possible in the first place. Welcome, Aakanksha, to this important discussion today. Let me introduce the other speaker, Shilpa Ranade. Shilpa Ranade is from Mumbai. She is a practicing architect and a researcher. She is the founding partner of the Mumbai-based design firm Deku, where her portfolio includes urban design, architecture, interior and product design projects. Shilpa has co-authored the critically acclaimed book, very interesting book, Why Loiter? Women and Risk on Mumbai Streets. It's published by Penguin Random House. It examines women's access to public spaces. She has also been associate editor of the South Asia volume of the book, World Architecture 1900-2000, A Critical Mosaic, published by Springer. In addition to her practice, Shilpa is a part-time faculty at the Kamla Raheja Vidyanidhi Institute of Architecture in Mumbai. Welcome, Shilpa, to this discussion today. With such distinguished speakers, I am sure that we are going to have a very insightful discussion on the subject. So may I request Aakanksha to come up with her ideas on safety of women, a street harassment of women in public places.
Thank you for that. Just before I get started though, I would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation as the traditional owners of the land that we are on today, and also to acknowledge that and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and pointing out that sovereignty was never ceded. So just to get started, I did make a short presentation. So I'll start by sharing that with all of you. Let me see. Can you all view this?
Yes, we can.
Cool. So as Mala mentioned earlier, so it's not a compliment, it was actually just a small fellowship task. For, so me and my co-founder actually met at a fellowship for young campaigners of color back in 2019. And part of the fellowship was to do a small practical task, whether it was to set up a meeting with a member of parliament, run a small social media campaign about an issue you care about. But in our case, we just, I guess you can say we've taken it a million steps further than that, because we started it and then we just kept going. We actually just recently finished our incorporation as an organization and are currently waiting for our charity status to be pushed through by the government. So just a brief history is that when we were talking about what kind of area what type of area we should focus on, what area we should focus on for our fellowship task, we realized that there are so many campaigns that focus on climate change, that focus on poverty, that focus on domestic violence. But what about something that happens every day for millions of people around the world? And we don't even talk about it. And that's when and then the more we started having these conversations in our circles, we realized that so many of us have been through it. It's just that we don't really talk about it. And which is not to do with the fact that we don't want to share our story, but because street harassment has been normalized for so many centuries that you think it's just a rite of passage or it's just something that we have to live with. So since then, we have gone on to go from a team of 2 to a team of 22 volunteers. And we continue to expand based on the amount of projects that we do, the types of programs that we run. And as Mala mentioned earlier, so our vision was to basically create a world where vulnerable communities do not have to place limitations on their own behavior when they are out in public so that they can feel safe. And when I mean vulnerable communities, I don't just mean women and girls. I mean people of color. I mean people with disabilities, people who are members of the LGBTQIA plus community. There's so many communities that face it, but all existing data and focus and laws as well focus only on the prevalence of street harassment from a gender lens. So it's not a compliment. One of the things that we were looking into when we were doing initial research into street harassment was there's not a proper definition of street harassment that actually encompasses all of the different forms and like manifestations of it, manifestations and types of street harassment. So we decided that, well, as you all know, the first step is to identify that there's a problem. And the second step is actually defining it. And so we went ahead and defined it after doing extensive research. And we define it as basically any unwanted behavior that makes someone feel uncomfortable in public space, whether it's whistling, leering, catcalling, sexually crude comments, inappropriate touching, asking for personal information, indecent exposure, and in some cases where it manifests into even bigger physical acts of violence, such as groping and sexual assault. So why street harassment, especially when it's such a normal thing why should we focus on it? So as a human being, when you're born, irrespective of where you live, in theory, we all have fundamental rights and freedoms. We also have fundamental freedoms that are awarded to us, not just by our governments, but also by the UN Declaration of Human Rights. And one of the things that it mentions is the freedom of movement, freedom to enjoy equality, whether it's in a public space or a private space. But when you think of street harassment in context to that, street harassment is basically a fundamental violation of your human rights. It's a violation of your dignity, because why would someone do it to you unless they think that they can get away with it, or they think that you are less than, thereby degrading your value as a human being. The other thing is that street harassment also affects the streets that you take. It affects your mobility. It affects whether you take public transportation in the night or you order a taxi, because you don't know if public transportation is safe. But then even when you're in that taxi, you're making sure that you're constantly on that app, tracking your location and sending it to your family or friends to make sure that you're safe. Or it's also about walking with the keys in between your fingers to make sure that, even if you're being followed, that you can, in a way, find a way to protect yourself. Or when people put in headphones without any music playing, just so they can, keep an ear out in case something suspicious might happen. So that's what we mean by freedom of movement. Street harassment has a detrimental impact on people's mental health and well-being. When people, for example, someone makes a comment about your body. So earlier today, literally an hour before this presentation, I went to the pharmacy to refill a prescription, and I was on my way back, and literally it's just down the street, and this just two random guys in a car just drove past screaming some very sexually crude comments at me. I don't know them, they don't know me, but they felt that they were entitled and that they were also able to do that because they can get away with it, which means that now when I go down that route, I might think twice, because it might potentially make me anxious. And it's not just my story, it's the story of millions of people around the world. And again, emphasizing that it also goes beyond gender. Especially, for example, at least in Australia, the racism that rose sharply during the COVID-19 pandemic against Asians living in Australia, Asian Americans, so many of them being called a virus, or so many of them being spat on or bullied in supermarkets, on the tram, on the streets. It has an impact, because it's someone violating your fundamental rights, your freedoms, but then at the same time inflicting that fear that you're suddenly, your safety is threatened or could be taken away at any moment. The last thing is that street harassment also exists on a continuum of violence. So it's not just this little innocent little concept that exists by itself. It exists on the spectrum of violence. It stands right next to sexual assault, sexual violence of different forms and types. While we were doing our research on existing campaigns and organizations around the world tackling street harassment, we realized that the situation around the world is very similar to what actually happens in Australia as well, which is that street harassment is prevalent, but we don't really acknowledge it. For example, when me and Annalise, my co-founder, started having conversations with people about INAC and about stories of street harassment, we realized that, wow, we do need to start talking about this, because we don't talk about it, we stay silent, which means we just let it continue. But then also, why would we speak up about it if nothing's going to change? And hence why we've kept going. since that, from that small little fellowship task to now being a full-fledged organization. Street harassment, as I mentioned, is not just about sexism. It's also about the interconnectivity between the different broader forms of societal oppression and discrimination, be it racism, sexism, xenophobia, ableism. Yet street harassment, the perception of street harassment is that it's just catcalling or it just affects women and girls. And the thing is, when we don't identify the full extent of a problem, we're doing it a disservice because we're not ever going to be able to fully tackle it. And then in addition to further isolating those who experience this type of harassment, the lack of intersectional conversations around street harassment hinder our ability to develop effective solutions to the social problem. So that is literally what I just said earlier, which is that if you don't recognize a problem, basically the different manifestations, the different types, the different forms, the different places it can occur, we will never be able to tackle it. And it's already hard enough because street harassment has been normalized for centuries, which means that it's not going to change overnight. But the thing is, if you don't try, you also won't know. But if you want to take that first step and be effective, you have to also understand the full extent of a problem. And that doesn't just apply to street harassment, whether it's poverty, whether it's human trafficking, whether it's lack of affordable housing. Every single issue can be broken down into so many different things that are interlinked in a complex web that need to also be untangled if we want to solve or tackle the solution. So street harassment is not just about catcalling. Street harassment is about the types and it's about the forms. So forms, as I mentioned, is like all the different forms of societal oppression. And then types are the different concepts such as whistling, leering, catcalling, sexually inappropriate comments, persistent requests for contact details, sometimes manifesting into acts of physical violence. So it's actually that interlinkages between both of these types and forms that actually provide that comprehensive picture of street harassment. One of the things we noticed, well, some of the several things that we noticed in relation to data, as you all know, a lot of times when you approach decision makers, or even when you're trying to change community attitudes about an issue, people ask you, but where's that data? And when we were starting out, we realized that there's a significant gap in the current data around street harassment. And that wasn't just like here, it's a global problem. And obviously as a society, we are getting better at identifying the different forms around the world, but we still have a long way to go. So one of the things that we still do actually actively every day is that we try to tackle the existing norms around street harassment, which is that it is a standalone issue, that it is intricately connected to all these different forms of societal oppression, that it exists on the spectrum of violence, and that it affects so many different marginalized groups. And the other thing was that you hear stories, you see it happen to people, you know it's happened to family members when they bring it up. You've had it happen to you. You've seen it happen to strangers in public spaces. And there's so many stories, but they're not highlighted. I remember when we launched online around 8 a.m. on the 8th of November, and within 2 hours, we had more than 10 stories. And it just kept going because people wanted to be heard. And also, that's one of the other reasons why we share stories, is that people wanted to be heard. People also needed a safe space to share their stories. And the other thing that is often ignored is that stories are also qualitative data, which is just as effective as quantitative data, because it's not just about numbers, because there's a lot more to human beings than just being black and white. And you might see a story, it might not have happened to you. It might because again, intersectionality. So all of us experience probably the same issue or the same incident very differently. Sorry, I'm really tired. The thing that we work really hard at ensuring that we do every time is the idea of matched empathy or matched emotion. So I might see a story that I might not have experienced, but what would resonate with me is that feeling of anxiety, that feeling of anger, that feeling of shame or frustration that that person might have felt in that moment. And by sharing stories, you're actually building a safe space where people can share their stories, but they also feel empowered to speak up against it because they're learning more and more about it. Something else that we found out in our journey is that a lot of times, because of the lack of awareness around street harassment, so many times people reach out to us and go, this happened to me when I was 9 years old. I didn't know back then that this was street harassment. Whereas now I know because, I have learned so much about it. So this goes back to what I said earlier, is that the first step is identifying the problem. Second step is defining it. And so now that we have that proper legal definition, people can understand, people can relate more to it and realize that what happened to them, A, will never ever be their fault, but also B, what they faced was actually street harassment. And when we share the stories, we also make sure that we don't refer to people as victims. We refer to them as people who faced it, because when you call someone a victim, you're also taking away some of the agency from them. I'd just lastly like to end with why criminalizing street harassment is a bad idea. So when you reflect on street harassment, right, it's such a fleeting act. Someone might scream at you from a car. Someone might touch you inappropriately on the bus. But in that moment, you're in shock, or like by the time you react, the moment has passed, which means, when you want to go to authorities, how do you report it to them? And also because someone is not going to harass you in a public space. So it's a stranger. So how do you go and report it when you don't know their name, you don't know their number, you don't know anything about them? The other thing is that current legislation around the world, whether it's, for example, in France or the Philippines, they only cover gendered form of street harassment, which means, just as an example, I'm a woman of color and I face racism in a public space. I will not be covered by that law. Someone else has a disability or is neurodiverse, they face harassment in a public space, they will not be covered by that law. The law is very limiting in that extent. And the other thing that I have not mentioned here, but is still very important to say, is that when you ask the judicial system to define it, you're also placing that standard, which means that if your incident does not meet that standard, your incident of street harassment, your experience is not valid, which also would further make people who faced it not want to go report it as well, because someone else is setting the bar, and why bother? And then you quietly just push it down. The other thing is that criminalization will lead to further policing of already over-policed groups. Like in Australia, for example, Black and Indigenous communities are already over-policed. When you introduce a law that gives leeway also to public officials like police officers who already over-police Black and Indigenous communities and other people of color, you're just going to exacerbate the situations and blow it up considerably. A brilliant but terrible example of that is actually the Black Lives Matter movement, because not all of us enjoy public spaces equally, and we don't know how many more incidents have to take place before the issue is actually taken seriously. Hence, just to wrap it up, one of our main goals of INAC is that instead of criminalization, we actually focus on community attitudes around street harassment, because you can hand out a fine, but how do you know that person will not go home or behind other closed doors, or when no one is watching in a public space, perpetuate an act that's even worse. There's no research to back it up. There is some research, but not enough. But there's also no research that disproves that theory either. So hence why I think that community education, we think at INAC that community education is the way to go forward, if you're especially looking at long-term, sustainable, long-lasting solutions to the problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Aakanksha. Sex street harassment is actually a very serious issue that confronts women in particular. While I was listening to your presentation, I was reminded of my own college days when I used to travel by the public transport, that is the DTC buses in Delhi. And those buses were used more by the boys and the men than by the women and young girls. So back home, our father never allowed us to travel by the bus. And he always said, because he felt protected, and he always said, no, I will take the responsibility of dropping you and bringing you back from college. That's not the solution. So we have to learn how to cope or how to tackle the situations also. So many times I fought and I traveled by bus, and I have tales to share what happened during the bus travel. But many times when we discussed it in our circles, it was never taken as an issue of concern. It was always said that the girls should reduce their mobility, they should stop going out, and that is the best solution for them. It was never looked upon as a right, my basic right to mobility, my basic right to education, my basic right to go to a college and study. Yeah. So I'm very happy when you talked about the different stages, that how street harassment has been identified as an issue of concern, as a problem. And we are trying to arrive at various solutions for it. I have a lot of questions for you, but I think we should go for the second presentation, and then the floor is open for question answers. Yeah. So let's have the young architect with us, Shilpa. I'm sure she will give us the perspective of these issues from the point of view of an urban planner. Over to you, Shilpa.
Thank you, Mala. Thank you. Yes, so Aakanksha, that was a fascinating presentation also, because, like Mala, you said, we tend to think of these as isolated incidents, but actually they really affect women's lives, or people's lives. Like people might change the way they make decisions about their lives. They might change the college they go to. They might change the profession. So they fundamentally change your whole life, actually, these small. So it tends to focus on the big events of assault and violence, but these everyday small things are actually what kind of really change your life in a way. So I think that's really important. Yes, so my presentation today, I'm going to focus, is based on the research that I've conducted with the sociologist Shilpa Phadke and journalist Samira Khan, which was called the Gender in Space Project. It was in the early 2000s, based in Pukar in Mumbai. So Pukar was a research organization, and it focused on women's access to public space, basically in Mumbai. What our research demonstrated unequivocally was that despite the fact that in 21st century global Mumbai, certain women are both visible and desirable in public, right? And Mumbai is kind of known to be a city where women, it's a city which is friendly to women. Particularly in their roles as professionals and consumers, they still have only conditional access and not claim to public city spaces. In other words, not only is public space gendered, but when comparing men and women of the same class and community, men have better access to public space than women at all times of the day. And the supplies, like I said, although Mumbai is considered one of the friendliest, so one can imagine what it would be in other cities. And it's important to kind of make a kind of talk about what class and community, because even in women of a certain class will have far more access than men of a middle class woman will have far more access than a working class man. So it's kind of there are a lot of kind of identity markers which come in deciding that. But in general, when you compare like equivalent men and women do have much less access. So although political and economic visibility has brought increased access to public space, it has not translated to greater rights to public space for women. Women have to constantly manufacture an appearance of purpose to legitimately access public space. It is believed that women kind of belong to the private, and if they are in the public, they have to in their everyday occupation, they are almost never found standing or hanging out without a clear purpose. So they'll kind of and they'll exaggerate their kind of purpose. So sometimes even if you've gone for a party and you're coming back late and standing at the bus stop, you'll pull out your big bag and file and kind of talk on the phone and to act as if you're coming back from work. So this idea of just hanging out is not acceptable. They occupy public space essentially as a transit between one private space to another. So it's kind of purpose defined. So you will go either from home to school to a friend's place, or from there to the mall or something, but it is essentially from one private space to another. You never, like, women don't hang out in public space. This purpose-defined movement of women is deeply connected to notions of respectability, which define what good women should and should not do in public. Based on this, in our book, Why Loiter? Women and Risk on Mumbai Streets, we argue that so long as women's relationship to public space remains framed within these two kind of Lakshman Rekhas, what we call of purpose and respectability, women cannot get unconditional access to public space. What has happened, particularly after the 2012 Delhi rape case and the incessant reportage of such cases across the country, it has brought to the foreground the specter of violence which looms over women in public space. So in all kinds of fora, whether it's in the media or even in colleges, we have these discussions regarding kind of safety of women in public space. So while on one hand, the demands for stronger legal structures and effective security measures are made, on the other hand, this has led to this thing where the policing of women and girls of all ages by themselves and those around them has gained unprecedented justification. So just like you said, Mala, the immediate reaction is to protect the woman, rather than kind of fight for her access. So unfortunately, in this situation, violence becomes the only language in which we can engage with violent questions of gender in public space, a situation which does nothing to further women's actual rights to public space. A single-minded focus on the dangers to women in public contradicts two very well-documented facts. One is that women face far more violence in private spaces than they do in public spaces. And the second is that far more men than women are attacked in public, actually, just maybe because of the sheer numbers in which they are there. But since conditional protection only brings surveillance and control for women, in order to claim the right to public space, we argue, we need to move beyond the struggle against violence and articulate women's right to the city in terms of a quest for pleasure. The quest for pleasure actually strengthens our struggle against violence because it frames it in the language of rights rather than protection. Further, the right to pleasure by default must encompass the right against violence. So this right includes the provision of infrastructure like transport, street lighting, public toilets, and policies that enable more sensitive law enforcement by recognizing people's fundamental right to access the public. What we need then is to redefine our understanding of violence in relation to public space to see not sexual assault or harassment, but the denial of access to public space as the worst possible outcome for women. In other words, we need to move beyond the safety question to assert women's right to the public. No matter what happens, right? So now the desire to access the city is not a new one, but it is fraught with obstacles. Many of them are ideological obstacles, like we talked about, which are social kind of constructs that we live in. But then there are the material obstacles, which emanate from the lack of adequate infrastructure to facilitate this kind of access for pleasure in the city. And the key kind of tripping point here is that public spaces and infrastructure are usually designed for an abstract generic user, because we don't know who we are designing for. The client is not there in a way. So we have this image of this generic neutral user, and in the context of our ideology which assumes that women's proper place is at home, this imagined neutral user of public infrastructure is invariably male. And not just gender, but all matter of politics, which is class, caste, religion, sexuality, as well as physical ability, are part of imagining this neutral user. So in Mumbai, the prototype user is not just male, but also middle or upper class, Hindu, upper caste, able-bodied, young, and heterosexual. Others who use these spaces and infrastructure just have to adjust and kind of make do with what they get. So the physically challenged have to make do with not being able to access most public transport facilities or public spaces in our cities. The old have to make do with negotiating high steps of subways and foot over bridges. The poor have to adjust with paying up for public spaces which they once had for free, because we've got more and more paid spaces in a way. The lower castes and Muslims have to be content with allowed only the margins and being constantly kind of under surveillance in a way. The gay have to pretend to be invisible and kind of pass as heterosexual, and women have to learn extreme bladder control and to negotiate dark streets and unfriendly parks. Changing attitudes may take time, but the provision of infrastructure can be a one-time policy decision, making the point that women belong to public space. So I'll just run through 3 quick examples across scales of design and public space and how it is kind of blind to all kinds of difference. I'll share a presentation. Yeah, so like I said, that the big tripping point is this myth of the neutral user that we have in a sense. So the first example is at a small scale is that of a public toilet, right? So this is a mapping of a public toilet which we did, which is right outside an important train station in Mumbai, which is Churchgate, which is part of the largest terminuses in Bombay. And this is like a typical kind of public toilet actually, where on one side you have this men's urinals. So you have 15 men's urinals which are open 24 hours of the day, right? They don't close. On the other side, I don't know why there's a dispensary in the middle, but it's there. On the other side, you have this whole section of men's toilets, where you have 6 men's toilets. The S are these 2 staff toilets. There are 6 men's toilets and 2 baths, okay? And there are just 3 women's toilets out there. And not just that, but there is one strange window in the middle, so that there is kind of no kind of separation between the two, like a proper separation. Actually, research has shown that to provide for equal access for men and women, you need to provide twice as many toilets for women as for men. That's because women take far longer to use the toilet. And that is not because they're spending time in front of the mirror, but it is because women are the ones who often take the children. So if they're children, it's women who will be taking them to the toilet. Women menstruate, they are pregnant, they are lactating. They use the toilet very differently. They squat to pee, right? So I think women need much more time than men. But if you look at this toilet, you would imagine that there are like whatever, maybe 1/10 of women in public space. And not only that, but they probably don't need to use the toilet after 9 o'clock, because the whole section on the right completely closes. And there are these small things like, which are very minor things, which is like the provision of a hook in a toilet for women. Right, so women carry their stuff in bags. They don't have pockets, which is another problem by itself. I don't know why women's clothes don't have pockets, but they don't. So women carry things in bags. So they need to hang their bag, right? And public toilets don't even have a hook. So you have a public toilet with a Western toilet seat increasingly, which is unhygienic because it's not clean. So you're hovering over the toilet seat with your bag kind of over your neck, and it's an exercise in gymnastics. So you really don't, it's not surprising that women think many times if they're going out in the public for long, you kind of strategize and you think about where is the toilet going to be and what can you use. And for middle class women and upper class, it's okay. You might just scoot into the nearest mall or even a 5-star hotel, and you can use the toilet. But that's an option which is not available to many women actually. At a second scale, if we look at a public park. So I'm just going to show two public parks. This is called Oval Maidan, and it's very famous because it's, I mean, both the parks that I'm going to show are kind of where a lot of Indian cricketers have come from. So so this sits in kind of the fort area, the old colonial area of Mumbai, where on one side there's a residential neighborhood, on the other side is a high court, the University of Mumbai, and so on. And on the top left corner is where the Churchgate station is, which I spoke about, which is like an important local train terminus. So one would imagine that this would be a really kind of well activated thoroughfare, you know, because on the extreme diagonal corner is where which is the main kind of the old commercial district of Mumbai. So you've got hordes, I mean, like thousands of people kind of going there throughout the day. So what happened in the late 90s is that the Oval was kind of beautified, you know, it was kind of cleaned up to keep away people who were kind of not supposed to be there, and kind of it was like beautifully fenced up. So, and what they did essentially is that they just kept two entrances in the shorter end, and you could only kind of cross the Maidan in the middle. And the rest of it was completely fenced up like this. So it's a lovely heritage fence, and it's kind of very well maintained and all that. But women do not feel comfortable going there because of the simple reason that in the deeper ends of the Maidan, it's not accessible, right? Because if something happens, you cannot quickly get out, you cannot go in and go out, and they become like deep dead pockets in a way. So you'll find mostly men hanging out there. There's a cricket academy at one end. You'll find men at all times of the day, but women you'll find normally like along this central footpath in the morning when they're walking or so on, but you don't find them at other places in the Maidan. On the other side, you have Shivaji Park, which is a kind of again in a middle class residential area. Now, Shivaji Park, it's about the same size. Shivaji Park is not kind of policed in any way. So the other thing is that the Oval is open only from 9 in the morning to 9 at night. So it's kind of policed. So one would think technically that should be a safer space, right? Because it's fenced, it's got policing and so on. On the other side, Shivaji Park cannot be fenced because you only have a low kind of a katta wall all around it. So there is a gate, but it's a nominal gate because you can always kind of hop over from the other side. It's open at 24 hours of the day. So you'll find all kinds of people there at all times of the day. So let's see. Am I audible? Because it says my internet connection is unstable. It's fine, right? Okay. Yeah, so you find like old people, like younger people, you find women out there who are sitting alone and like just reading, which is a rare sight in our public spaces. So the fact is that unlike what intuition would say, where you police the public space to make it safer, actually more planners and urban designers have repeatedly pointed out that the way to make a public space safer is to welcome more people rather than to try and keep others out, in a sense. And these two examples are really good kind of, they demonstrated very clearly. The third example that I'll come to is at an urban planning level, which is that increasingly our cities are kind of getting sanitized into these zones of, you've got residential zones, commercial zones, industrial zones, everything is put into its own pocket and kind of cleaned up. But what happens is that in these, so this is a people count that we did in Nariman Point, which is a commercial district in South Mumbai. And what we find is that even at the highest, in a sense, you just have 19% women and 1% children in that space, right? So what happens is that in that actually mixed use neighborhoods where there are people out in the street, you have shops which are open till late, there are eyes on the street, they are far more comfortable for women and for other marginal citizens than kind of these kind of exclusive zoned areas. So I'm just going to quickly show this is Ballard Estate, which is another South Bombay commercial area, versus Chembur, which is a mixed use middle class kind of area outside the station at the same time of the day. And you can see how kind of occupied it is, and you can imagine what will be kind of a more comfortable space to be in. The same places at, so this is the Nariman, but same at around 10 o'clock in the night. And you can see that Chembur is open even kind of late into the night, and you'll find people there like even later, so it becomes much more comfortable for women to be out there. Yeah. So just to kind of wind up, the point is that these the clean lines and people-less streets don't necessarily translate into more comfortable spaces for women, and the other thing is that although I'm talking about women here, the effect is that when you design for women and when you start thinking about the others who are actually the majority of the population, right? In a sense, if you put just the able-bodied upper class kind of a young man aside, the rest of it is like the majority of the population. You're actually also providing for them because you're also trying to think about them. The idea is to kind of change the perspective away from this neutral kind of imagined user. And the other thing that we also found is that women are kind of kept away from public space by putting up this kind of a imaginary opposition between women and other marginal citizens. So women are like middle class women are seen like the working class or Muslim man is seen as a threat to the middle class kind of Hindu woman. And in effect, both are kind of kept away from public space. So actually, it is important that we think that you cannot think about access for women while not thinking about access for others. You know, it's only when one kind of argues for access for all kinds of people in public space that women can get kind of adequate access to public space. Yeah, so I'll stop there and we can kind of discuss further as we go. Mala, you're on mute. You're on mute.
You know, very good presentation. Thank you, Shilpa. Your presentation has reminded me of a conversation with the person who was visiting India from another country. And he asked me, it was about 9:30 in the night, and he says, Mala, I don't see women around. Where are the women in India? And it didn't occur to me, why was he asking me that? Because I took it. I have also internalized the thing that after it gets dark, the young girls and women will not go out. That's why at the church station toilet, maybe it's locked after 9 p.m.
Yeah.
In the anticipation that no woman will come now.
Yeah.
You know, so how this kind of lopsided planning excludes women or other kind of people from different categories. I have a lot of questions for you too, Shilpa, but let me go to Aakanksha. Aakanksha, you rightly said that the problem has been identified and you through the organizational setup are trying to address this issue. My question to you is, why are you saying that behavioral change needs to be given more focus as compared to maybe the policing or the legislation? Because I feel that behavioral change is a very slow process. It may take years to take place. Till then, women will keep becoming these survivors. I also don't use the word victim for women. I always call them survivors. So this list of survivors is going to be exceptionally long. So do you think there has to be an organized, institutionalized response system to address the issue of street harassment?
I think there definitely needs to be an institutionalized response. So for example, in Washington, D.C., collective action against safe spaces, collective action for safe spaces, or one of our partners and allies, what they've done is that they worked with the local government, the district government, to ensure that a legal definition of street harassment is adapted. And then additionally, that it was compulsory to have educational and community education and awareness programs around street harassment. And something that's something that we've adopted as well, but we've added on an extra layer, which is that we all have a role to play in when it comes to creating safer communities. And hence why we think that it's a combination of recognizing the problem on a legal level. It's also ensuring that community education and awareness become the norm rather than the exception. And then additionally, and community awareness and education also involves being able to identify, like I mentioned earlier, people who are like, I now know that this was street harassment, because then that's the first step to tackling the problem. And then the other thing is bystander intervention training, which is stepping up when it is safe for you and for the person who's facing the harassment from the perpetrator to step in and help them out without actually making them feel less than. Because the thing is, one of the many reasons street harassment is normalized is because, you know, as they say, the standard you walk past is the standard you accept. And because we walked past it for decades, for centuries, it's an accepted thing, which means that if you see someone facing it, you might not call it out. But also there's the flip side of you might not know how to call it out. Hence why we give such a big weightage to community education and awareness. Because sometimes, for example, you know, you might think, I've seen this, I want to help, but you might not know how to, whether it's poverty, whether it's human rights, whether it's climate change. But then once you start doing your research and once you, like, for example, hear about it, you have these conversations about it, you start to realize there's actually so much more you can do. So one of the main objectives of our training, three of the main objectives of our training is that A, you're able to identify and understand different types and forms. B, we have 4 to 5 different methods that you could utilize. And depending on the situation, of course, because as you know, it all happens so quickly most of the time, in most cases. And C, if by doing it, you have to ensure that you're not putting yourself or the person facing it at risk. And which means that the hope is that it creates the domino effect of, you know, when you call it out and you have all these other people watching, who will then realize that this is something that is wrong. And the reason that we say we prefer community engagement over criminalization is because, for example, take a thief, you know, like you might find him stealing something, you might, and then, you know, you might give him a fine, or you might have spent like a month in jail. But how do you know he won't do it again? And maybe next time he might even get away with it. And the same analogy works here as well. You know, like the 2 men who felt completely okay screaming at me from the car while I was just minding my own business, walking back from the pharmacy, like 300 meters from my house. How do I know that if they had been called up, they won't do it again when there's no police around, when there are no cameras around? And especially in terms of criminal, like when you focus on handing out fines, you're also focusing on diverting like judicial and like police resources, which are already quite, they're already under a lot of pressure. And they're already overutilized. You know, there's not enough manpower. So when you divert attention to things like this, which could, you know, which this time could be allocated doing something better, or something different, rather than having to sit around and police people, is just a monumental waste of, like, say, the federal budget or even the state or local budget. So that's where I'm coming from.
So what I understand is this. Yes, this issue has been identified, but still this issue has not been centralized.
Yep.
Has not been centralized. And that's why it's not been felt so significant and important that maybe in the name of resource crunch or other things, it's, sidelined. But then maybe we forget, by not addressing the issue of street harassment, we are sending the woman back into that vicious circle of loss of self-confidence, not going to work, loss of mobility, and maybe back to no school or formal education. Well, I have so many more questions for you. But Shilpa, when you were talking about the infrastructure and how the planning, lopsided planning, as we say, restricts the entry or the participation of people across different categories, then one thing that comes to my mind is there are 2 things. One is the process, the other is the product. So process is the planning process where, multi-stakeholders consultations are conducted, the views, the perspectives, the opinions, interests of everybody, who is going to use that space is being consulted. And second is what product, what facility will be created in the end. So do you think that there is more focus on the product than on the planning? That's one part of the question. And second, maybe you can answer me first this and I go to the second one then.
Yeah, you're right. I think the process, I mean, it's very critical that the process changes and the kind of the focus is not only on the product. And to a degree, the processes have changed because there are many more kind of, and I think it is part of, I'm not a planner actually, so I wouldn't know, but from whatever my experience of it is that certain kind of stakeholder inputs and all are necessary actually now in the process, right? So they are part of they're required of the process. I mean, one very good example is the Mumbai development plan for 2031, which was released about 3 years back or roughly. So it was supposed to, it came first in 2014 and then it was revised and kind of put out again. And there were a lot of stakeholder, like civil society kind of interventions in that. And that was not only from the side of the government and the planning authorities or people who were given this thing. So they organized it, but the civil society itself was also very active. And they formed their own kind of, nodal groups around different issues, and they discussed the development plan proposals, and they went back with kind of suggestions and criticisms and so on. So I think in that sense, as a process, it was kind of, I think it is happening to a degree. What happens, however, is that to a degree, like what happens in many cases, it remains lip service in many ways, so it will kind of get done, but not necessarily it will get included. Also, when it came to gender, like Mumbai is actually the only plan in the country which has a gender component to it, the development plan, the 2031 DP. But a lot of things that the kind of women's rights groups had kind of suggested didn't get included. So there are things like there are working women's hostels and land kind of allocated for that and things like that. But what happens is that these are kind of tangible solutions which can be ticked off and showcased. But then there are more intangible things like transportation. Like women use transportation very differently from men. Like women are always trip chaining. So women make shorter trips, so they'll go to the market, pick up a child, go to work, whatever. They'll do multiple things and kind of, so it's called trip chaining, and they use public transport very, very differently as against men who will normally make one large trip in a day and come back, So it's kind of, so now those kind of things are more invisible and kind of not very, PR friendly kind of thing. So they don't kind of get incorporated very easily in the planning, in the product. So I think, but I mean, change is there. So I mean, there is reason to be optimistic, but it needs to be far more rigorous, I would say.
So we need to strengthen the planning process.
Yeah.
Second thing, do you think that because in a particular geography, it is the people who live in that geography and planning is done for those people. So why don't we create a database of people, number of children, women, migrants? Because at the end of the day, the public places are going to be used by this population who is there. So is it very difficult to create that kind of database which will be fed into the planning process and maybe the end product is different?
I think on paper the database is there, like on part of the census you have it on paper. It is just that because the vision is so lopsided that it is not addressed. You just assume that that you're designing for this, or you design this one thing which will fit everybody. So it's or to say that is the vision that everybody has about a good life. So I think it's more about kind of really taking these differences seriously, and thinking that by providing for difference, you're not doing people a favor, right? You're not doing old people a favor by making streets easily accessible. It's their right. So I think it's a more change needed, I think, very much. So
very rightly said. They are not doing any favor to people. Yeah. It's their right, and that is what they are there for. I have a few questions from the participants. There is one Aditi Bafna. So maybe the question that she has asked is, what are the ways in which students or youth can contribute to this cause? So I think one of you, is Aditi there or not? I don't know. Maybe would she like to come in and say it herself, or I ask one of the speakers to answer it? Okay, so maybe our expert can answer. I think what she means to say is the cause of creating the inclusive public places. So, what are the ways in which students can contribute to it? A very good question. So, Aakanksha, would you like to, because you're working with youth, so do you think you would like to answer this since your organization is working so much in terms of collecting these stories and listening to them, giving them a platform where they can, where, you know, they can be heard safely and in total privacy?
I would say start by having honest, open conversations about it, and coming together, because here's the thing, and what so many people, when they come out with their story, for example, it's they're taking ownership of the situation, they're reclaiming the narrative. And so by having these conversations on how often it happens or how it's happened or when it happened, you're actually starting that process of getting together, whether it's in your group, whether it's your family, whether it's your friends, whether it's your coworkers, or whether it's your classmates. You're like you develop a deeper understanding of the issue itself. Then you realize that when you're talking about it, that all these, like, this goes back to what I said about matched emotions, and the ability to empathize with different aspects of different stories, whether it's anxiety, fear, anger, shame. And while you're having those conversations, you're also developing your understanding of the issue. And which means that when you go out in public spaces, you'll be able to recognize it. And if it's safe to do so, you might even be able to call it out, thereby ensuring that it's not just something that we walk past. But again, going back to the aspect of making sure that when you do that, it's safe for you to do so. I would not recommend, for example, a 10-year-old girl or even a boy, that if they see it happening, that they should go out and call it out, unless, maybe there's a parent with them or there's a guardian, because you shouldn't be endangering your own safety just to try to save the other person, because then you're just endangering both people. And that just defeats the whole purpose of trying to build safer communities. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think you are right. Youth have to take the lead and they have to show the way.
Yeah, actually, there's something else I wanted to add, is that for so many young girls, right, like even with my parents, they would go, don't wear this or don't wear that. And for a long time, I was like, but everyone else gets to. It took me years to realize that it was not because they didn't trust me, they just didn't trust other people. And, they don't, like, it's not that in their eyes I'm less than, it's the fact that I'm not just a standalone, I also exist in society. So it's not existing in vacuum. So you do what you can to ensure your safety as well. So it was, sometimes my curfew was 10 o'clock or 9, unless, my brother was going out too as he got older, because my parents would count on the fact that we would both come back safely. Whereas the other day I sometimes go do my groceries at like 9:30 in the night because the supermarket closed at 11. And I know that my mom always asks me, why are you out so late? Even though there've been times where they've called me and I've been out later, but it's because I think it's that, deep-seated fear that still exists, particularly for, when you are a parent to a young girl or to a young woman. It's that existing fear that comes on, that you also are constantly ensuring that you stay on top of. So with young women, that's like, for example, one of the things that we are doing this year, It's Not a Compliment, is running a seed course with the Student Voice Network, which is a network of more than 1,000 students across Australia and around the world. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be doing Create Change, like a seed fellowship for them, where we give them a crash course on all these different skills like advocacy, campaigning, how to interact with the media, how to approach your politician, whether it's a federal or local MP. And in the end, it'll culminate with a project that they will do, similar to what me and my co-founder did, but this will be exclusively just for people who are in like middle school or high school. And the reason we're doing it for them is for working with young people is because it starts at a young age. Unless, they learn about it from an earlier age as well, they're just going to continue normalizing it, thinking it's their fault. And then that narrative will continue on affecting their self-worth, the way they look at themselves, the way they interact in public spaces, all of those things. Yeah.
So it's not only the youth, even the children who are, during adolescence, if they are addressed these issues, then maybe they learn the lessons of, they learn that we have to have a gender equitable world. We cannot have these gender inequalities anymore, because the growth and development doesn't occur without leaving the 50% of the population behind or out of the realm of, work.
But also why you need to involve youth is because at the moment the world has like a majority of the world's population is youth. And they're also not the future, they're already here and they're already taking charge. So, and clearly current solutions to problems have magnificently failed. Absolutely. And so why not take on that fresh perspective that young people bring on?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think you answered the question very beautifully. So a very interesting question is, what special measures can be taken to make a public space safe for women, especially from an architectural point of view? So maybe Shilpa can answer. This is a question from Kajal Silani.
Yeah, so I did mention already a few things in my presentation, so I hope that like those answers partly answered it. But it's kind of the important thing to remember is that surveillance is not the answer, like to safety, right? That's a very important thing, because the first thing, particularly when we're in a technological world, the first thing we think about is putting up more video cameras.
That's it.
But the thing is that CCTVs and these things are a double-edged sword. So you might get safety on one side, but you're also taking away from freedom, and particularly for marginal citizens, because and increasingly in the kind of country that we're living in, that it's going to take away from people's fundamental rights. That is what it's going to do effectively. So surveillance is not the answer to creating safety. I think it's fundamentally, this is to recognize that there are different people, that different bodies occupy space differently, right? They have different needs from public space, and to kind of address those differences in a very basic, at a fundamental level, rather than just kind of just tweak your generic solution to provide for them. So I think but other than that, like the fundamental things would be kind of more visibility, more lighting, kind of more people on the streets, right? So all these things are kind of direct kind of answers to how you can make a city safe. But it's also other things about providing infrastructure so that women feel that they belong. Like I said, that if public toilets are open 24/7 for women, then women feel that they belong there, right? It's the same. The answer to that, if they're closed at 9, means that you're, or if you're kind of out there after 9 o'clock. So I think it's a more fundamental level, in addition to what I mentioned in the presentation. So I won't repeat some of those. Yeah.
So I think this is more of psychological barriers also that we need to break. Like closing the toilet. I know that the toilet will not be open at this time, or this particular park or the street will not be open. It will be more of men who will be loitering around, So I'm not welcome there. So those kind of mindsets. I remember a young girl who was, in a class 12, and they had a party. They all went. This was class 12 party. You know that? What do you call that? School, when school says bye to the class 12 students. So they all went to a party, but this girl came back, and these boys came to drop her back. Why? Because they said, oh, it's all the girls are going home, their parents are calling them back, and that place is not safe. Imagine the boys saying that the place is not safe for this girl and she has to be home by this time. So, those kind of mindsets, those kind of conditions, those barriers is what we need to actually work on. And I'm sure youth can work on it beautifully. So one very important question which is coming from Abhilash, I think Neelam would be able to answer it better. What are the possibilities of industry institute collaboration through CGBMT? Because you represent CGBMT, so I think you would be able to answer it better.
Okay, thank you, Mala. So I've been listening to all the presentations and all the discussions. And as an architect and as also a person who has been trying to work for a common man, how a common man has to feel safe, feel happy and comfortable in this world. And that is how CGBMT School of Simple Living that talks about. And safety was one of the aspects, of course, one of the major aspects in that. So if Abhilash, you are talking about only this session, or you're talking about collaboration in general, because we are dealing with several issues that we have dealt. This is the 22nd simple talk that we have done, and we have touched upon food, water, air, all kinds of things which would make a common man, a simple man's life comfortable. I think that's what the happiness index that CGBMT looks out. So you can write to us what is exactly you are looking for, because CGBMT is looking for collaborations. We are trying to reach out to people, and we will be most happy. And we are not trying to do things in vacuum. This is also not just research based, which is going to be put in files. We are trying to touch people's lives, and through various programs that we are trying to do, nudge them, bring them to our portals, to our programs, and engage with them. So we will be most happy to collaborate. You can write. We are already under several MOUs, and we are doing several MOUs with different types of organizations. So we will be most happy to do that. So
there is one
I
more
don't know
question.
whether he is there in the document. Yeah.
Neelam, there is the last question, which is related to the previous question, or maybe even what they are referring to is one of the careers which maybe the Shilpa belongs to, or Aakanksha. I will read out the question. What are possible career paths to solve issues such as this one? So I think what she's asking is about, this is Tanvi Khatri who is asked the question. And I think what she needs to ask is whether, when we are talking about gender sensitive ecosystem, gender sensitive public places or inclusive public places, how is it that one, chooses a career for him or herself and join this stream? So it's open to all.
Yeah, so I mean, there are like obvious careers which will work on, like which some of us are working on, kind of thing, which are there. But I think what I would say is that whatever you're doing, if you can mainstream thinking about gender and other differences, I think that is how you'll make the most contribution. So whatever you might be working in a corporate firm, for example. But what happens is that what we tend to do is that we are so kind of conditioned to think from this this kind of hegemonic kind of, what I call this neutral user kind of perspective, that we tend to think that is the right thing. So you want to be professionals, and when you want to be professionals, you don't want to bring your own personal experiences on the table, and those personal experiences are actually what will create change. Which is what Aakanksha is also saying. It is your own stories that make the difference. So in corporate culture, for example, this idea that you have to work so many hours and you have to do the after party and you have to kind of be there. But if you're working and you realize that, no, but this is making me uncomfortable, or this doesn't work for me, and you bring that onto the table, and there are conversations, and then you create change, right? So you might be doing anything. I think, but the idea is to kind of to mainstream your experiences and to bring them and to create, because change is needed everywhere actually, in a sense, and in effect it affects the public space also, because public space kind of is related to everything, sense. So kind of demanding that you want to, I mean, you have the right to public space and then you will use it. And so in your everyday lives, I think. So, I mean, more than a career, I think in any career that you use, it becomes important. So,
It is the interest of the person that matters at the end of the day. So if one wants to be gender sensitive urban planner, why not do architecture with gender studies? Why not combine the two? Why not study sociology and talk about urban sociology or rural sociology in terms of infrastructure, institutions, systems, and processes of social programming? Also, as Aakanksha has made up her career in, she specialized in global studies and how she has integrated it with the issues of gender and, making leaving a mark there. So there are various combinations and permutations is what I would like to say. Youth are very smart these days. And, there was a time when we had only 3, 4 professions before us. Engineer ban jao, doctor ban jao, ya CA ban jao. My whole family, is from those professional categories. I am the odd one out. So I was always laughed at. She has nothing to do. She just, does what. So these days, there are lots of professions, lots of career choices, and you can do great in any of these.
Just to
So,
be strategic about it, though, just thinking of it, if like just looking at the question as well, it depends on when you identify the stakeholders, because in this case, the stakeholders are general public, educators, policymakers, civic organizations, it's corporates, it's other non-for-profits, it's men who are the main perpetrators of violence, and it's also the marginalized groups. So it depends, who do you want to work with, or also where would you be most passionate as well? Because something that a lot of people come across when they work on social justice issues is that like besides passion, what you also need is hope, because you're not going to solve any of these issues, be it climate change, be it or achieving sustainable development goals. You're not going to ending human trafficking. None of that's going to happen in one day or even 1 year. It might not even happen in a lifetime. But hence why I say that as long as you're passionate and also hopeful. So, you could be a decision maker. You could be, maybe you love drafting policy. Maybe you love creating campaigns. And then you adapt that to the issue that you're also passionate about. It's kind of like an intersection, basically.
Absolutely, Aakanksha.
Yeah, you could be even an artist. You could be even an artist who expresses these injustices in the. I know many people who have social issues expressed through their art, their sculptures, their many other ways. I mean, so their possible career paths are so many. I mean, as I think both everyone, all three of the speakers were speaking, I think anything is possible, right?
But this subject is so interesting. It can go on for hours together. I don't know if there's a time limit, and or if we can go on further for some questions.
We should be closing it actually. Yeah.
Okay.
I have some questions which I had been doing, but I think most of it has been answered. So I think it's fine. So as an architect, I would like to add some points. I think we need to slightly revise maybe even our town planning guidelines and rules and regulations that we have, the Town Planning Act, in terms of planning, which says, so many toilets for women and so many toilets for men. As Shilpa was talking about, there are norms that we have actually in our Town Planning Act. And similarly for other things also, there are many standards, that really needs to be, changed, and that can be addressed only when the voices come, and then somehow, more voices come, they become stronger, and then somebody taps the door, and then it becomes a policy or a law or a act or a rule or something like that. So it has to go that way. So that is one more aspect that is there. And schools and colleges, transportation hubs, these are all places actually where I think the public places where all these things that we talked about, actually the standards for all these are sort of given, and people try to stick to the standard just like that. So I think more sensitive planning, because that might be the minimal, and if it is not there, it's not going to change in the next 15 years. But as architects, like Shilpa was speaking, can actually change, designers can change certain many things, in fact. And one more thing which I have been, as an architect all these years, that I have been telling, that architect is a catalyst of change, because they really influence the behavior of people through what they design. And most of the life acts takes place in those places and spaces. So this is something which is very important, that designers are supposed to be looking at, how to make it safe, and safe spaces and things like that. So this is something, in designing also a lot can be actually contributed in designing, in providing rather safe spaces and places. And of course the social part is another very important part, media is another very important part, and all these things need to be working together to really take this whole actually movement forward. So these are some things which, and that's where, so though I am an architect, I am also sort of, it has shifted to me, because I feel that architecture is a, it's a social service thing, because we have to look at architecture as a profession for service to society. It's very recently there's a term which has started coming up, and everyone is talking about social architecture. Because, but for me, architecture was always social. You have to, you can't be, yeah, it has to be social all the time. You are not always, creating for yourself. You're creating for other people. You're creating for public. And what once you have done, it is out there, for people to use. So you have to be extremely sensitive about that responsibility that is on your shoulders, to put out what you are really putting out for people, and understand them as a human beings, and of different kinds, and of different abilities and different races, and how they will really go through them. So there's a lot of thing that needs to be required, which architects and planners and other people can do, and social people can do. I think Aakanksha's intervention training also, I thought that was something very nice that they have started. How to do that and how to implement, as Mala was talking, that how do we institutionalize that thing. I think that's something CGBMT can actually step in. We would like to take this forward, in case we are able to see that we try to bring these things into the curriculum, or in the school extracurricular activities or something like that, in the schools and colleges and institutions across, and also to the common man. Because this simple talk series, this is the last of the one that we are doing in this one whole year that we had been working on, is so we are talking always about the common man. So we never, every time the speakers and the people whom we brought, they kept on asking us, who are your audience? And I kept on saying, it's the simple man, it's the common man on the street. He needs to know how rainwater harvesting is done. He needs to know what the people have to provide him. He needs to know how the water is a common property of the people. So we have been trying to bring these stories and talks to them, to the common man. And that's where I think we have to start looking at a society where people are happy, people are safe, people are healthy. So that addresses all the issues that we have in our society. So this is something which is for the common man and the simple man. And as far as I understand, and as far as my experience goes, till from right from my student days, I have been I mean, now, right now the word is sustainability, but I did not know that it was sustainability. I thought it was a way to do things. So uh, my thought and my belief is that no COP21, COP25, COP30, or even COP50 can solve all the SDG goals. It is the common man, when he's awakened, he is pushed in the way that he's supposed to be pushed, and not pushed, I would say, rather guided in that way, that we can actually solve these problems of the SDG, or achieve these SDG goals to even the slightest extent. It's the common man who will do it. It's not the people sitting in the bureaucrats and this and that and all that policy maker. It's a common man like you and me and everybody else. And I think that's where the solution lies. And that's why we have been trying to bring all the grassroots people who have worked with the absolutely people at the grassroots level to make larger transformative changes, rather than trying to only address big organizations and things like that, because that doesn't work actually in the end. So that has been our goal, and that's the kind of so sort of wrapping up, bringing us to this particular session today. I think I'll just sum up. I think already everything has been spoken. It will be more like a repetition. Yeah, so our public spaces must allow for all individuals to interact safely and respectfully, and those in authority must treat all users with compatible respect. The public space needs to encourage people to help one another and to practice stewardship of the space. We must care for one another and for the urban spaces that in which we live. And lastly, public spaces must be accessible to everyone in the community. We must all strive towards social justice by any means that we are able, and these concepts are a foundation upon which we can build towards equity and safety to everyone in the public sphere for everything actually. I will end with this by thank giving to this program, as I said, is being held in partnership with Dalbagh Education Institute, Dalbagh Agra as institutional partners. I thank Professor Dr. Prem Kalra, Director DEI Deemed University Agra, who has been silently taking the university to a value-based and ecological education hub with culture and cutting-edge technology going hand in hand. I thank Architect Molly Caprihan, head of the department, and Architect Piyush Prakash, faculty, Department of Architecture, whom you met in the beginning of the session, for co-hosting the session. And I also thank all of you participants for actively participating in the webinar with extreme enthusiasm. This is our last of our series of Simple Talks 2020-2021. We are celebrating our Foundation Day on 26th April 2020. And among other programs, we will have two panel discussions, one on negotiating the built between man and nature, which is being moderated by Architect Dean De Cruz, and another one on local skilling for the sustainability sector, which is going to be moderated by Sangeeta Agasti, who has worked with UNIDO, and she has worked with the Foundation of MSME for over 20-25 years. And she has worked on several SARC programs and international programs on skilling and MSME sector. We also will have Architect Peter Rick from South Africa giving the keynote address, and Dr. Nitin Pandit from the US. He is the director of the A3 Foundation, speaking on skilling for the sustainability sector. We're also having a virtual quiz program on environmental and sustainability in daily life for children in the age group of 9 to 12 and 18 to 22 years. I request you all to participate as per your convenience. And in the end, I leave you with this thought to ponder on: what do you or can you pledge to do to make your spaces and places safe for yourself and your loved ones in the future? Thank you once again. Stay healthy, stay safe, and have a great weekend. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.